Thank you so much for tuning in to Circling Dialogos. If you are inspired by what we talk about on this channel and want to dive deeper and in fellowship with others, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is to become my client and work one-on-one with me. We also have circling events every week open to the public. We also do weekend intensives for circling every 4 to 6 weeks or so. And we have a year-long Art of Circling practitioner training program. We also have self-study programs that you can do at your own pace. All the relevant links, including my email, is below in the show notes. Please let me know if you have any questions. Three. Welcome, my friend.
Good to be here, brother.
Yeah, it's really good to see you again. We had just, I really enjoyed, we did a podcast for your podcast not that long ago, and it was ended up being a really amazing conversation and had me even more curious about you. And
yeah, I love that conversation. It's nice to I feel like every time we get to hang out, I get another layer of you. I get to understand who you are a little bit more, and I certainly get another layer of your wisdom and your expertise. So, but it is nice to have a very focused, hour and 15 together, where it's not like, other people listening in and adding or subtracting. It's just fucking one-on-one. That's pretty cool. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, same here. Same here. So it's interesting. You are going to be a I was trying to think about this. I was thinking about for most of the conversations I usually have on this channel. First of all, my only goal with my YouTube channel is just to follow my interest, right? So basically, right, the end result of my channel, whoever's talking, whatever's presented is the only thing you can have guaranteed is that guy's interested in it. I think a lot of I would say a lot of the people that I've had on have it, there's been philosophers and scientists and all that kind of stuff, right? And one of the things that's really interests me about you is, and I want to go into this, two things, is you're in the, I actually met you through Aubrey Marcus. Right. And yep. I know that you're really good friends with Aubrey, and you also are part of the what do they call it? The summit? What's it? The summit? Is it called
Fit for Service?
Fit for Service. Yeah. And you guys have like quarterly summits in which I've gone out and taught, and I've done workshops and stuff for Aubrey and their staff. And I first met you in the call preparing for that. And I know that you are in the kind of, you could say, personal development world. Like, I know you've touched in on the psychedelic world. I've heard you use the word homesteading with your kids. And I know you did a lot of partying in ASU, which is the party college of the world, the top party college of the world, I believe.
We were number one when I was there. I don't think we're number one anymore, but yeah. While I was there every fucking year, number one.
Yeah, you left out. Yeah, it went number two when you left,
according to Playboy. So we had a good run there for sure.
And you also had a fighting career, which I'm
And I know you've been involved in the fitness industry, right? And the alternative fitness industry and all kinds of stuff. So there's many angles of convergence, of where we converge. But like, how did it all start out with you? Like, what there was a moment where you didn't exist, and no one no one you didn't exist, and then after a certain moment you were conceived. You probably don't, maybe you remember that, but probably not. And then you were born, and when you were born, you probably, like most people, got a whole inheritance called parents and time and space and a location and a world. What tell us a little bit about your inheritance?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Um, let's see. I was born in San Jose. We spent a little bit of time in Oregon, where both my parents were from. They're both, my dad's the oldest of five kids, my mom the second oldest, or maybe she was the oldest of five kids also. Either way, big families up in the Pacific Northwest, but both my parents decided we don't like the rain and we need to get away from our parents. So they moved down south to California. That's where I spent most of my time growing up. And I think in a nutshell, if I was to summarize the imprints that I had were, my parents fought a lot, and that, really didn't sit well with me. I just kind of would go into a little shell, when you think of like the trauma response and things like that, as I discovered this stuff later. I would be as introverted as possible. I'm a rock. I don't exist. Everything is fine. And then out of the house, all hell would break loose. So I would, because of that, just pulling back on the slingshot. The second I got out, I had no problem talking shit to a principal or to a teacher. That didn't bode very well for academics. But I probably had a handful of teachers that really took me under their wing. They could see, there was intelligence there and wanted to work with me, and knew how to speak and work with me, and I respected that there was some level of effort on their part to say like, hey, dude, you're going to be fine, but we need to work with you a little differently,
Yeah.
Football was my first love. First of all, was my first real outlet when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And I do need to address this. If you're watching the video here, I'm not controlling the camera right now. I have a new iMac, and this thing's zooming in and zooming out and finding new angles, which is fucking making me crack up while you're doing the intro. Anywho, just listening, no big deal. But yeah, if you're watching this, I don't control any of this shit. It's following me around the room wherever I move. So football was like the best thing I ever could have had. I remember I was 8 years old and I had a couple of friends that had been playing for 2 years, and I was like, you're allowed to play? You've been playing since you were 6? Like, this game exists? And I had watched football. We were fans of the 49ers, the Raiders, and the Bay Area growing up. Bay Area sports was top tier. Yeah. Football and baseball, basketball. And that gave me, it gave me an outlet to butt heads with people. And back then, it's not like today's football, rightfully so. They're changing the game so people don't get decapitated. But back then, we were encouraged, put your face mask on them. I remember at 8 years old, we would grab grass on the ground and smash each other eyebrow to eyebrow with helmets on to strengthen our neck and to learn how to hit right.
Right.
And it was a different time, but that was something for me that just let me burn a little of that steam that was pressure building. I could open up the top there, open up the lid for a minute and let that pressure boil over. And I had that for many years. I fought a lot growing up. It wasn't the Wild West, but like, this was before zero tolerance laws. I remember when zero tolerance went into place in high school, and it was kind of like, don't get caught fighting, you're going to get expelled. Like, there's no two ways about it. There's absolutely zero tolerance. And that did change things a bit. But before that, I have a lot of memories from 6 years old, like running, trying to outrun bullies. I got picked on a lot because I was really tall and skinny. So like, a lot of the older kids knew I was younger, but I was bigger than them on some way, even though I was a beanpole.
Oh, that's a bad combination.
Bad combination. And my mom dressed me, so like preppy style, like all the way up until high school probably. And yeah, that required me sprinting away from people. And sometimes if I could not run them, I'd have to turn and let it go. But one of the things that I recognized in that, I didn't learn about this until much later on, the psychology behind it, or you read Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheal, who's a buddy, and Stephen Kotler, and you talk about flow states. I had no idea what that terminology was, but at the time, in hindsight, I could see like nothing else mattered. It actually was the most quiet, peaceful time in my life was in a fight, because it zeroed me in with laser focus and nothing else existed but that moment.
Yeah.
So like Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, all these things, like that was my entry point.
Yeah.
And it was, and because it's a fight, it's a heightened degree, right? It's much higher than football, where I could loosely go in and out of flow, loosely go in and out of focus.
Yeah.
And it's a long game and you have breaks in between the plays, that kind of thing. So, but it wasn't like all the way in for the entire time. And fighting really gave me that. And I never really tracked it until later. But football ended in a kind of a shitty way for my taste. I walked on at Arizona State, made the team, felt great, became a hard hat award winner from our team, and was travel squad, all the good things. Didn't see much playing time. And I really sat the bench realizing like my senior year, I'm never going to play again. Mm-hmm. I had seen guys who played their whole career and started every game for 4 years not make it to the NFL. So the fact that I was sitting the bench my senior year, I was like, all those dreams are gone.
Yeah.
And post football, I really hit rock bottom. Like that was a time, like we had mentioned, there's all the bad drugs and bad drugs versus good drugs. I have a rule of thumb. If I feel good the next day, that can qualify as a good drug. Anything that leaves me more whole than when I started, I'll call that a good drug. Yeah. And that would include plant medicines and things like that, right relation, right set and setting. Anything that makes me feel good in the time being, but hurts me afterwards, we're going to call that a bad drug. So I had lots of bad drugs at ASU, and I realized I never wanted my parents' jobs. They were both in sales. They both had, it was peaks and valleys. We'd be rich for a month and go out to eat, and then we'd be dead poor for 2 months, and it was like pure stress and pure chaos. And I realized I didn't want to have a sales job. I also did change my major so many times to stay eligible for football that I really didn't give a shit about the stuff I was learning anymore. I had maximized all the classes I could take in psychology, philosophy, communication, sociology. But unless I was going to dive in at any one single thing, I had to do courses that I didn't really want to do. It was like a bachelor in interdisciplinary studies. So it was 2 minors to equal 1 major. And a lot of the classes at that time were like, write your report on why this major is better than the other one. And I knew wholeheartedly, I was like, it's not. I'm lying. If I fucking write this report, it's a complete lie, and I don't want to have to go through that. And I don't want to have to interview for jobs where I need to explain why this is good. So, the childhood stuff I hadn't worked on, seeing no light at the end of the tunnel from a career standpoint that was worth the shit. And then my true love, my only outlet, ending very quickly. I was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I knew that the one thing I loved was gone. I had a lot of relationship issues because I hadn't worked on myself. And I also had this, fucking kitchen sink of drugs. And I mean, everything from cocaine to ecstasy to prescription pills like Vicodin, Xanax, Valium, all that stuff from a naturopath to give me whatever the fuck I wanted. He wasn't giving me the cocaine and stuff, but he was giving me all the anti-anxiety pills and things like that. And at a certain point, I felt like it wasn't worthwhile sticking around anymore. And I slammed every pill that I had left. And thankfully, that was probably, I don't know, 10, 20 pills total.
Yeah.
And drove the top of parking lot 7, disrobed, and was getting ready to jump. And I remember this wash coming over me. It was like the first real transcendent experience that I've ever had. And I could just feel the words kind of imprint. I didn't hear anything, but I just felt not yet. And it settled, this warm wave settled over me. And maybe that was the anti-anxiety medication kicking in. I'm not sure, but it felt different. And it felt like something like a consciousness outside of me was imprinting on me. The peace that I'm seeking in this moment will come, but not yet. There's more to do here.
Yeah.
And right then I heard a voice like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing up there? Oh shit, you're naked." And then I like snapped back to reality. I was like, "Oh fuck, you're the guard. I got a robe. I'll throw it on." And he started laughing. He's like,
"Pause." Something imminent.
Yeah. He's like, "Can you come down for me?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he drove me to the hospital. I told him what was going on. He drove me to the hospital. I woke up 36 hours later in the hospital. My parents had flown in with my sister. And that was probably one of the first times where I was able ever to communicate directly what I wanted to say to them, shit that I'd never said in 20 plus years. And there was therapists and different people there. And they said, "You're not saying this for them to receive that, right? You got to
Yeah.
say this for you to say it, because they may deny it, they may pretend it never happened, and all that stuff was true. There wasn't a great response from it, but my ability to get off my chest and see them eye to eye as adults at that point was big medicine for me. And really what that time did is it exploded all ideas of what I should be, all ideas of what I should do. You know, I had all the pressure of, I need to finish college. I've racked up fucking 6 figures in debt being here. I was a walk-on. I wasn't a scholarship guy.
Yeah.
I need a degree to show for that. I'm not going to make money if I don't get a degree. And all the language that I had just been indoctrinated with, it exploded. And it was the first time where I really got to just answer the question, what do I want to do? You know, and I started tracking that for the first time, really thinking about what was I missing? And I missed the camaraderie in football. I missed, you know, lifting weights with a team, not lifting weights at 24-hour fitness. That was like masturbating. Like I wanted the energy of people around me. And I started training in mixed martial arts at that point, just as a means of trying to attain that again, to get a team and to feel some sense of camaraderie and purpose and togetherness. Like we're going to do some hard shit, but we're going to do it together, and it's going to have exponential benefit, you know? And it wasn't long from there where I had a guy who ran a gym, and he's like, he also ran a small promotion called Rage in the Cage. It's like, you're tall, you're handsome, you're athletic, have a pro fight. You know, if you win, great, you can continue. If you don't, big deal. You could say you fought once pro, right? And I was like, that's not a bad sales pitch. And so my first 2 fights, I won in under 30 seconds. With the small, you know, the few months of knowledge that I had.
Mixed martial arts.
Yeah, mixed martial arts, and
for people who aren't familiar with that, is that anything like MMA? Are you wearing helmets? Are you like just?
This is great. Mixed martial arts is MMA for long. MMA is mixed martial arts for short.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So you'd call that cage fighting, or, you know, the UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship. A lot of people who fight in MMA don't make it to the UFC.
Yeah,
I did. I got to make it in the UFC. I fought there for 6 years, for my final 6 years. But along the way, and I'll put a button in this. I had a boxing coach who was a mestizo Aztec and Mexican, and he worked with me, you know, boxing stuff, and he was a little guy, and he called him Huitzi, you know, short for Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the little hummingbird god. And he moved like a hummingbird. He could move in and out in all directions. And he started working with me. And he took a lot of the guys at American Kickboxing Academy to take us out for traditional sweat lodges on Native American land.
Oh, really?
After a couple of years of that, I asked him, you know, I said, hey, when are we going to use La Medicina? And he just started bursting up laughing. He's like, man, I've been waiting for you to ask. And he was my introduction into psilocybin and ayahuasca, and just changed my entire trajectory, you know, getting to work with him. He's since passed away, but I credit him as like one of the cornerstone pieces in my life development, and really taught me about how to work with these things with respect and reverence, and the whole gamut that goes into it.
Well, I wasn't expecting that so your introduction to like the conscious, right, the conscious side, the ceremonial side of psychedelics is actually through your boxing and MMA and through fighting, right? Through kind of, I was not expecting that part of the story. That's really interesting. So he was one of your fighting coaches, and he was it part of your training, or was it your friendship with him? What did he take as part of your training? Did he take you out to sweat lodges and stuff like that, or how did that?
We started to think of fighting, you know, life as a ceremony. And that was one of the pieces. You know, you take a bonehead fighter who just wants to beat the shit out of people. Yeah. How do you bridge that gap, right? So one of the bridges was, if we look at this fight camp as itself, its own ceremony, we're going to enter that clean. And so we would go to a sweat lodge at the very beginning, right when the contract's signed, and we would go through our intentions. And the purpose of the sweat was to hone our intention around that camp. It was to clear out all the shit that I had been doing in between camp, which I was still kind of a bad boy in between camps, and then really focus and hone in on what we wanted to accomplish together. Post fight, we'd get back in the sweat. So I had 2 of these for every fight. I had 3 fights a year, roughly. So about 6 sweats a year. Post fight, it was about healing physically, mentally, emotionally, learning from the fight, and making, you know, recentering our North Star on where we were going to go based on the win or the loss.
Yeah. Correct. Wow. That's really interesting. So it's like, so that That's just really, that's just striking to me. I wasn't expecting you to say that, right? In terms of like in with the fighting. And actually I want to go back a little bit. I want to pick up on something that you said. Actually, a place where I really felt you, in the conversation. Well, I've been feeling you throughout the conversation, but there was a moment where I felt something kind of like really drop in listening to you. And it was when you talked about where you had just woken up from overdosing essentially, and after that spiritual experience that you had, and when you talked about sharing with what I'm imagining is your family, like things that you had never shared with them before, and you talked about it was for you, right? It almost didn't even matter how they responded, but like it was stuff that you held in. And I was curious about like this also links to like kind of what happened, right, in your childhood, right, that had you like shut down or stay quiet, right, like a slingshot. That was a great image, by the way. Like this idea, it's like right, quiet, and then you're at the door and the whole world gets all of it. It's a great image. But like what kinds of things like did you go through? Like what kinds of things did you hold in and got to disclose while you were in the hospital?
Yeah, I mean, there's the things that really, I mean, there's physical stuff, like getting kicked in the ass hard enough for my feet to leave the ground. Getting shaken by I used to have a beautiful head of hair, and I'd get lifted off the ground by it with my head shook, shit like that. So there's bits and pieces of things like that are, noticeably hard from the physical sense. But I think the thing that really weighed on me was always having to be on pincushion, like we're walking on eggshells. I don't know. I had two Rams for parents. Neither one of them knew how to back down. Neither one of them could be the matador, neither one of them could cushion the other until it was too late. And for as long as I can remember, it felt like shit could pop off at any moment. And I mean, there's so many dinner times where things are cool. They make one comment to each other and the whole fucking thing got turned upside down. I talked to my mom, who lives in Texas now, about this the other day, about how we were eating tostadas. And I was like, I fucking love tostadas. These are really good. And I was like, what's weird? Every time I have tostadas, I picture tostada night at our house when she threw plates full of tostadas up against the wall and at his feet, right? And I go, and I started cracking up, and I go, why did you do that? And she goes, yeah. He said they didn't taste good. And she said it so matter of fact. And I was like, you don't see that's like an overreaction? Like, yeah, that's a dick move to say your food doesn't taste good, but you can't tell as a 60-year-old woman, and that was overdoing it in response.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we got a good laugh out of it, thinking, remembering back to that. But as a 7-year-old, like, holy shit, like your whole world is turned upside down. There's no dinner. There's no appetite for dinner. I had a little sister who's a year younger than me, who's just incredible. She's got 4 kids now, still lives in NorCal. I always loved and adored her and always was her protector. And, to see that impact her and have no real ability to step in or mediate or do anything to make it better, that was a really hard piece to carry out of all that. And a lot of what I was saying was just how that impacted me, like they transitioned away and they started reading kids' books and shit. Oh, spanking's wrong, that kind of stuff. And it all shifted. But it really improved for me when they got divorced when I was 13. And oddly enough, that hurt my sister because she thought her whole world had ended. If the family's not connected, then we're all screwed. For me, I knew that there was no reason for these people to be together. They had no way of communicating with one another. I'd seen, my friends' parents talked differently to each other. I was like, you guys don't get it. You're not right for each other. And at that point, my relationship with my father had changed a bit. He was less overbearing because he didn't have us. He saw us every other weekend. And I'd work with him in different odds and ends jobs, doing construction and stuff like that. And you know, it just changed the scope of things. But really in the hospital, it was just a vent. And it even let my mom know, like, this is not all him, man. Like, there's a lot of shit you did that stuck to me just as bad. And from the divorce on, it was kind of like there was a lot of talk from her around, well, your dad did it this way, your dad, well, you know, a lot of stuff where I mean, all this shit too is just great learning. You know, like, it's kind of a fucked up, weird way to put it, but like, I look now and like, they've helped my relationship so much. So much. Like, I wouldn't be in the relationship I am today. I wouldn't be the dad that I am today. And I certainly wouldn't be the husband that I am today, or have the communication styles that I do with my wife, if I didn't have that upbringing, because I saw everything not to do. And I saw the consequences of what happens when you do it that way. You know, so it couldn't have been a better teaching for me. But in the time, you know, it's hard to look at it from that aspect.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. You know, when you talked about you made this distinction inherently when you talked about what it, you know, growing up, and there was like being picked up from your hair and what I would imagine the explosive experiences, right? The what some people would call the abuse, the moments of abuse. And then you talked about, well, there was at another level, there was always walking on eggshells, right? The always, because I often have thought about this, that, you know, and we share some similarities in background when it comes to how we grew up, right? And you know, there's all the yelling, there's all the fighting, there's all the moments of craziness that go on, right? And I often thought, like, you know, if you added all of that up and condensed it, and if it was just that, I think I'd be fine, because it's not really that fucked me up. It was the horizon of that was possible, right? And that's where all the adaptation and all of the tension and the anticipation and the compensations and all of that was like living in a world where what was called home, right? Things like that could happen, right? Right. So that anticipation, I think, is what parented me in some respects. That was the impact of that, right? It wasn't so much like being beat up or being yelled at or all those kinds of things. Those kinds of things hurt, but it was living in a world where that was possible, and anticipating that is where all of the patterns, the emotional patterns and the weird dysfunctional kind of adaptations and compensations that like came out of that with me.
It's how superheroes are built, you know?
It totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Wolverine doesn't have a good time when they're putting adamantium in his body. You know, he's fucking writhing pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other thing too, I heard you talk about too, which is really interesting, was, so for you, it was actually getting into fights is where it all went to zero for you. Like everything locked in, like getting into fights. That's really interesting to me. And would you, like, in those early fights, would you win most of the time? Like, did you, like, before you got into fighting, like disciplined and training for it and stuff like that, like, how did you do? There's your camera.
Yeah. The camera zooms out and zooms back in.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's almost like AI's got a sense of humor.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, I won almost every single fight I've ever had, but that was due to careful mate selection. You know, like, if I thought a guy was going to kick my ass, I was not going to stop running. Like, there would be, I would run till I had fucking battery acid pumping through my legs. There was no stopping to turn around.
Got it.
If it seemed, you know, even in a 2-on-1 scenario where I'm the one guy versus two, if it seemed like I got a chance here, I would stop and put it to him. And I was always, you know, incredibly athletic and strong. So even though I was skinny as a beanpole, I had a pretty unique strength early on. And you know, once I got into wrestling around 13, like the whole game changed. Like, I really felt like I was a fucking superhero at that point. It's the first time I'd really trained for endurance. I'd trained for putting people on their back. And any fights that happened after I became a wrestler were comically lopsided. You know, somebody would open up with a haymaker that starts with them pulling their fist back 3 feet. And before they even slingshot it forward, I've already put them on the ground and started smashing them. So that you know, and all wrestlers can attest to that. Like, it gives you a gift. Yeah. You see it now with kids, like Rogan posts a lot of these jiu-jitsu kids where the bully comes and they just slowly take their backpack off and toss some kid on his head and yank his arm off, you know, and you're like, oh shit. Like, that's the evolution of the schoolyard game. They know some shit you don't, you know, like don't pick on anyone anymore. Yeah. So, but wrestling was that for me, you know, before jiu-jitsu had really taken onto the mainstream and things like that. You know, it's interesting because when I had the proposition to fight professionally, I knew they were different things. I fought because I had to growing up. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't absolutely have to, I wouldn't, right? I would run or I'd talk shit and just use my mouth and just, you know, and verbally, you know, we could spar for an hour, but nothing would happen. You see that a lot, you know, like people like throw a punch, you know, and kids are just talking shit to each other the whole time and nothing ever happens. There was plenty of those too. But oddly enough, there was quite a few physical altercations growing up. And I did understand those as kind of uniquely in their own category compared to fighting somebody who's trained professionally and spent time doing that. And I didn't necessarily know that I had a draw for that. I knew that I wanted the team, and I knew that I enjoyed learning new things and keeping my blade sharp. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until, you know, those first 2 victories. I mean, I liken it like this. Mm-hmm. When you hit a home run, you hit it with the sweet spot of the bat, it feels easy, and you're just like, oh God, there it goes. Yeah. Wow, look at that, right? Like there's a moment where everything goes perfectly, and then you're just like, there it is, right? And you can either showboat or just set the bat down and walk the bases, but you do this thing, and there's a palpable feeling to it. Yeah. Whatever that feeling is, when you knock someone out, it's 1,000 times that. It is so exponentially greater than that feeling, and that's how my first 2 fights went. You know, it was like. Yeah.
Wow, the first 2 fights was it's like 1,000 times better than a home run.
Yeah, they're under 30 seconds. I hit, and same thing. Knee to the gut. They get dropped them like just, and I could look down at them like, you're done. You know, like there's no getting up. Yeah. You put one perfect one right in the breadbasket, and they, you know, like I said, I wouldn't have great skill, but I had enough of the technical aspects from my training mixed with the athleticism and the right timing too. That just made it happen that way. And then I really had like a coming to Jesus moment where it was like, am I going to do this thing or not? And so it was 3 fights in where I really got serious and started to train and looked for new coaching. And
and this is what age? How old are you at this point?
26, I want to say. I was 26. And then so old for someone starting in MMA, right? You know, compared to like, you had Vitor Belfort winning the belt at 18 or 19. You had, you know, Robbie Lawler, guys that had started really young that had made that their career. I didn't have that, but I did learn a lot at ASU from an athletic standpoint. And one of my coaches, big coach House, Joe Ken, he was the only guy ever to win Strength Coach of the Year in Division I football and in the NFL. He did it with the Carolina Panthers when they went to the Super Bowl. Yeah. And what he did for me is he pushed me past every glass ceiling that I thought until he had done it so much that I realized that there is no fucking limit here to what I become. It's just a factor of how far do I want to push myself. Yeah. And that I took that going into MMA, knowing like wherever I'm at now is just the beginning, you know, and I was fighting guys and training with guys that were so much better than me. I went to school with Cain Velasquez, Ryan Bader, CB Dalloway. Bader became a champion in Bellator. Cain Velasquez became UFC heavyweight champion. We brought in Luke Rockhold, middleweight champion in the UFC. Daniel Cormier, light heavyweight and heavyweight champion in the UFC. Those are the guys that I trained and sparred with my whole career.
Right. So, right.
But that piece from ASU just kept pushing me. Like I realized like it's as far as I want to take it, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So you're basically like, you'd done 3 fights. It was your 3rd fight when you had a coming to Jesus moment with yourself of like, okay, was it like, okay, I clearly have the potential, right, to make this a go, but do I want to? Do I really want to?
Yeah, knowing what I was signing up for at that point, right? Because I'd been in one fight that went the distance and I'd won that fight fairly convincingly, but it was also my first real grind. those aren't fun. Even if you come out winning, I probably have, quite a few of those victories in my bed. 2 fight of the nights where this eye was fractured, swollen shut.
Wow. Yeah.
A couple fight of the nights in the UFC where you basically both guys get their ass kicked. There's no real winner, even though somebody still gets their hand raised. Like you've shaved years off your life in victory for fucking 10 grand, 20 grand. It's not financially, it doesn't make sense either. But it was what it had done for me. I think if I look at my fight career in a nutshell, is it forced me to take care of myself. See, when I got out of ASU, I realized like the bad drugs are going to hurt me. I had a taste of the good drugs, but I didn't necessarily have the right relation. What was my alchemical balance point of play and party, and then honing in and being strict. And so a lot of my fight career was polarized in that in fight camp, I'm reading books like A New Earth. I'm meditating daily. I'm not watching TV. I'm getting into sauna and ice bath and mobility work from Dr. Kelly Stretton, anything that would help me become a better athlete and recover faster. And so my second education happened in MMA.
Yeah.
But after the fight, it was all bets are off. I've been a good boy. I go right back to the fucking to the shenanigans I had at ASU, where it was a little bit more balanced and a little bit more kept in a container. But at the same time, it was still all bets are off. We're going to go balls to the wall. And that oscillated back and forth. I couldn't be a bad boy in camp because the bad drugs would take too much out of me. I couldn't recover. I wasn't good enough to do that. But really, it was right after my career ended. I had an ayahuasca journey that went back in between these two modes of being, where I got to viscerally feel how I felt in camp, where I was calm, centered, peaceful. Even if I had, worries about the fight and things like that, they weren't overwhelming because my baseline was there.
Right.
And then post-fight, I got to relive feeling hungover. I got to relive feeling, deprived of neurochemistry from fucking doing too much. I got to live in that space, and I would purge from that space, and I'd go back and forth from like feeling the most lifted, purposeful, and just centered to now, I have no real ground to stand on, and really feeling what that did to my body, my brain and my psyche. So that was probably one of the biggest journeys I've ever had, because it showed me what I was teaching myself through my career. And after that I didn't need to have a fight to take care of myself, that just being alive was enough to take care of myself. Just being here was enough for me to want to do better for myself.
Right. Okay, got it. So there's something about so up until that point, right, for you to take care of yourself had to do with the fight, right? Like you could go the extra mile, and you could pursue the extra thing and really take care of yourself in relationship to a fight. But when you actually started doing medicine in a conscious way, right? And what you're talking about is the experience, right? The experience of the ground that you would feel after you would undergo a journey. And then watching that comparison, right? There's a sense of something about the experience of the medicine, and the holistic experience of the medicine is what I'm hearing you say, right? Kind of showed you something, right? Showed you something over time that has made a huge difference for you. And the essence, would you say, what was the essence of what it showed you?
Well, it was what I mean when I say it was visceral is I literally got to re-experience those states of being. Yeah. So viscerally, I would feel the center, the peace, the joy, like the radiance of being fucking sober and having meditated and having gone to bed on time, and the clarity of that, like, all is good in the world. And I'm coming from my center. All is good right now. And then it would oscillate back to, I'd see myself throwing shots down and snorting rails and fucking, I've got the rush going, and then it hits, it goes down, and then I got to purge that out. And so the visceral nature of that was when I felt yucky, I'd puke it up, and I'd puke it up in the ayahuasca ceremony on behalf of what I'd done to myself years prior, right? Yes. Yes. So that oscillation happened enough times to where, I was tapping out. I was like, remember, there's been plenty of ceremonies where you're like, okay, I get it. I don't need any more. And no, you're going to have some more. You're going to have some more. I'm going to get some more until it's so ingrained in me that I can't forget it, and that is the beauty and the pain of how ayahuasca teaches at some points is that it can be a fairly relentless teacher that will not let up. And she didn't let up. I mean, it was one of those things where like I had 8 hours of that oscillation until I was like, finally it wore off. And I was like, okay, now what do I want to do?
Right.
You know, and that really was since the suicide attempt at the end of football, the very first, now what do I want to do with that degree of meaning? Now what do I want to do? Because I had no idea post fighting. I just knew, thanks to the plants, that that wasn't me. It was just a moment in my life, right? Whereas football, that really was me. That was the only thing I knew. Yeah. And when it ended, I didn't know what the fuck to do. When fighting ended, I said, well, that's not me, but I don't know what to do. And I really spent a lot of time showing me these states of being. Like, where do you want to operate from first and foremost? The other shit will work itself out. Yeah. And that's what that ceremony was really about. After that, it was just, you know, the downloads I kept getting were just follow the thing you desire. You know, if you enjoy reading books and studying health and wellness and getting into all this stuff, do that. Like, it's gonna pan out. You don't have to figure out how that'll make money. It will. Yeah. And 2015 came along, the year after I had retired, and about a year after that ceremony, and Joe Rogan invited me on the podcast. We talked all things, you know, fasting, ketogenic diets, healing traumatic brain injury, you know, psychedelics, fighting, all the things. And he told me afterwards, he's like, dude, you got to start a podcast. And he's like, you know, you told probably 1,000 guests that. And he's like, no, I'm serious. You really should. And so I ended up starting a podcast a couple of years later. I finally had the balls to start it. And that led me to, you know, everything that I'm into now. You know, that was my doorway to meet great people. We were living in Vegas. We had moved out, you know, my whole fight career, I lived in my mom's garage. I didn't make a lot of money at all from fighting. Yeah. And my wife, I met on a tour for the troops in Kuwait and Iraq. She was a ring girl in the UFC. Yeah. And I had her move in with me. She's a trooper. That's how I know she's my ride or die. She's lived in the garage with me for 5 years. And we had our firstborn son. We actually had shared visions of him in ayahuasca, where before we were married, before we had talked about having kids, we knew we wanted kids, but we hadn't really sat down and gotten into that yet. And we ended up having him at Stanford. We brought him back to the garage, you know, and for almost 2 years, he grew up in that detached garage, my mom's detached garage. Huh. And the pressure and the weight of being a provider and knowing that I can't raise a family in this garage. Really started laying on me. And so I had a few nights to really work through that with I again. And you know, the first couple of nights were some of the deeper work on family stuff and the family that I'm creating, the family I came from, and the family I'm creating. And then the third night was really was more on career, you know, and I thought about going to PaleoFX for a multitude of reasons. I love all the guys that speak there, the guys and gals, and people that I've been following in health and wellness for a long time. And the cost of it was too much. You know, I was like, I didn't have the money to go. There's a lot of reasons I couldn't go. And I kind of argued that ceremony with if I should go or not. But really what I was saying is, you're going to go to meet people. You're not going to go to learn from them. So don't worry. Yeah, you've read the book. You're not going to learn more from their 20-minute speech on stage than they put into their book. You do know more than you're going to learn from them, but you're going to meet people. And that's what this is about. And so I said, yes. The next day, flights are cut in half, the 50% off on Southwest. The next day, I got a call from my buddies at Mind Pump. They're like, hey, you're coming with us to PaleoFX. We've got all the Airbnbs, the rental cars. We're going to take care of it all. Come be dude on the couch. So literally, the stars just started lining up. And when I went, I got to meet Aubrey Marcus, and we shared the same flight home. They were looking at opening their next space in the same place we were living in Vegas. And we had moved out of the garage temporarily, not sure where we were going to go. And, you know, for 3 hours, we went through, you know, all traded war stories the whole entire time on fighting and everything in between. And he's like, you got to come work with me at On It. You know, he knew my level of understanding of the human body, performance, sports performance, longevity. And he had me take over the On It podcast. He had me as director of human optimization, where I was designing supplements for On It. We did that for 3 years together before he stepped down as CEO and I stepped down. And at that time, Fit for Service was already created. So this was the kind of the next big leg in the journey. Yeah. And again, you know, I can look at every one of these points and see there was some hand guiding it, you know, where it just kind of clicked together. Yeah. And a lot of people would call that coincidence. I don't believe in that. And a lot of other people say, oh, you had your shit handed to you. And it's like, well, I had it handed to me because I had earned it. You know, like I had it handed to me at that point because I had proved myself in the cage and had done enough to learn that I could speak to it. So things really did line up in that way. And that's taken me to where I'm today, in many ways.
It's funny as you're talking about the shift. And basically what I heard you say is like, yeah, I look back and I'm like, no, there's a hand involved. Right. And you also said, like, at the same time, you worked your ass off. Right. Like there's a multiple paradoxes that I think that you're pointing to in there. And I'm right now with my son, I'm reading a book called by Tillich called The Courage to Be. And it's a really amazing, it's like an amazingly deep book. And one of the things he says about courage, he looks at courage as a virtue. And he says that courage, what it does, right, is that in his view, courage is that virtue that discloses being. Right? So like when being is unconcealed and disclosed at deeper dimensions, right? What does that is the virtue of courage. There's this link between, right, the opening up of being, right, and the practice of courage. And I think what I heard you say is kind of like it took courage to kind of get what you got in your ceremony, which was like, well, even though I don't have the money, go anyways, right? Because it's not about anything that you can understand. It's about like relationships and meeting people, right? And so there you are, you didn't have the money and you went in, like, then things worked out. You just went for it, right? And then you ended up meeting Aubrey, you guys connected. He ends up having a company that he could hire you at, right? It ended up being a perfect fit. And all these things kind of opened up from that, right?
Yeah, brother.
Yeah.
I love that. I just wrote that book down. I'm gonna grab that one as well. I think that's it's cool too, because that's exactly the virtue we were speaking to the last time we were hanging out with you in Montana with John Vervaeke.
Yeah.
That seemed like the most there was a burning desire in me to speak to that. And so I got to lead in the dialectica of Dialogos, and that was profound.
Yeah, courage, totally. So there was this kind of sense where, like, so basically, you were. How long was your fighting career total? How long was it fighting?
It was eight years as a pro, so maybe 8.5 years. I think I trained for about 6 months before I had my first pro fight. Okay, so 8.5 years total.
Yeah. And you had different titles, and you had hit different levels with that. Were you like?
I was never a champion. I'd done pretty well. I was 7-0. I was 5-0 in Rage in the Cage before I went to King of the Cage. Won 2 fights there. After that first loss, that's when I got another, kind of big pivotal moment. Was my coach in Arizona said, you need a team. Go back to Northern California where you're from, train at American Kickboxing Academy, because I can't give you the training partners. Yeah. And so I did that, and that's where I linked up with Kane and Daniel Cormier and Luke Rockhold and many legends of the sport, guys that'll be in the UFC Hall of Fame. And even though I didn't become champion, in many ways I helped all of them become a champion, and I learned so much. Again, for me, the fight career was really a refinement of how I wanted to live, and what were the ways that I could optimize performance. And then on the backside of that, how could I optimize longevity? How could I heal from the things that I'd done to myself? Both in college and in the cage, so, that was university for me at the highest level. No question. Yeah, totally. Okay. Totally got it. And then all of this, like, kind of this transition happened. Had you had a child yet by the time that you left for that paleo conference, or was your... I did. Bear was born in 2015. So, but really, it does start with the plants really in 2010. And my fight career, if I look back, I could see it was kind of parsing itself out. I didn't have a ton of fights between 2012 and 2014. I fought twice. I had some pretty serious injuries. So I had a lot of, injured time is reflection time. And thanks to the plants and some of the books I was reading, it offered me space to meditate and do the shit that I wouldn't necessarily do year round. I would do it in fight camp. But now, being hurt without a fight coming up, I almost had to, by default, find a way to center myself, because as an athlete, most athletes understand this. Like, if you can't move, it's pretty depressing. it's one thing, if you didn't care for sports and shit like that, and you're a video game junkie, and then you hurt your leg, and it's like, all right, cool, more video games. Like for me though, that was the end all be all. I couldn't express, and if I can't express and move my body, even today, I've worked a great deal on that to make sure that if I am hurt, I'm still happy around my kids. I'm still whole and centered on the inside, and meditation's been a big piece of that. But yeah, Bear was born in 2015. And like I said, the provider instinct was switched on for the first time, where it was like before, when I was fighting, I could do that as long as I wanted. It didn't matter that I wasn't making a lot of money because I was doing what I loved. It didn't matter that, potentially I wouldn't become champion. If I don't become champion, I'm certainly not going to have the money to open a gym or do the other things that I would within that sport. What ayahuasca was also imprinting on me was, the leap of faith. Really, you think about, like in all great movie, like in Indiana Jones, he throws sometimes you throw the dust and you can see the invisible bridge. Sometimes you can't. You just got to fucking jump. And I had to do that at fairly, regular intervals. It didn't feel like that when I went into MMA, because I almost tiptoed my way in and had such great success early on. It was easy to say yes to it, but leaving it was a leap of faith. And I had a friend who worked in big oil as a pipeline inspector, and he even paid for my education to go and do it. His name was Matt Hewitt. He's a great dude, and we're still buddies. And I'd go there, I aced my test. It was in Houston, and guys start at 250 grand a year, full medical, full dental, 401k, all the shit that I didn't have in fighting. I didn't have fucking insurance in fighting, right? I had nothing. If I got hurt, I got hurt outside the fight, it was on me. If I got hurt in the fight, they take care of it. You get a staph infection, I got to pay out of pocket for that, right? We weren't insured. So, thinking of it that way, it was like, well, this checks every box on what I should do, but I had already burst that bubble, coming out of college. So like, why do I need to listen to what I should do, right? And so the option was podcasts for nothing, with no hope in sight, and millions of podcasts already existing. It's like saying, I want to start a YouTube channel in 2023. You're like, good luck, buddy. Right, Cream rises to the top, right? Yeah. And so I start this podcast, turning down 250 grand a year starting, turning down family medical and dental, turning down all these things.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about this. So this is okay. This paints the picture even more. It's like, it's not like you just started a podcast. You actually, like, in doing that, you turned down something really traditionally secure.
Yeah, it was a big deal. I felt terrible too for my buddy who had paid my way through school, but he's like, I get it, man. One of the decisions that helped me was he told me that out of his 8 friends he went in with, 6 of them were divorced. I was like, fuck, dude, that's heavy. I said, why is that? And he goes, well, you have overtime opportunities. You start at 250, but when you start getting paid time and a half for overtime, it's really hard to say no. So guys will start at 40, 50 hours a week, but they'll end up working 70 or 80 for 6-month stretches. They might make 450, 550 grand in a year, but all the money in the world doesn't pay for your presence. And if you're not around, that will lead to separation. So that really weighed on me, and knowing, like, if I had that option, what would I do? It's really easy to convince yourself, make more money now, buy the things that I need, shore up the investment strategy and my portfolio, and make sure that my kids have money. And you say all these things for those reasons, but my relationship with Tosh meant more than that, and I knew, having a kid too, that I wanted my favorite moments with my dad did a lot of good. One of the things is, like, we could be watching the 49ers in the playoffs, and if I had an itch to go throw the football, he'd turn the game off and go throw a football for me. He wouldn't say, no, that's Joe Montana, he's going to win the Super Bowl. He'd say, sure. And he'd turn the game off without hesitation, and we go throw footballs. We could wrestle anytime. We'd watch WCW and WWF, and if I got worked up, he would just jump down, he'd get out on all fours, and I'd just try to beat on him and wrestle him, and we'd wrestle constantly. And so there was always an element of play and an element of touch that was wholesome. Like, I had growing pains in my shins. He'd massage me while I was crying for fucking years. That would happen. I'd grow 2 inches in the summer, and every night for 2 months, he'd be massaging my legs with Ben Gay or something like that.
Who is this you're referring to? Who?
My dad. Dad.
Okay, so your relationship with your dad. Yeah.
And there was a point where his career kind of took off, and when it did, he was making a lot of money, but I saw his health go to shit. He gained like 40 or 50 pounds. It was like a tire around his waist. And
Yeah.
he was less happy. He was more stressed. It was like the more money he made, the more stressed he got about making more money. And he didn't feel good. And there wasn't a right relationship between his work-life balance.
Yeah.
So when I'm outside of it looking in, designing it, it's like, do I want that? No, I don't want that. Right. And what are the things that he did right? Well, I do want that. I want to be able to have time to spend with my kids. I want to be able to wrestle with them and do all the things. And this path afforded me that. It afforded me the ability to make my own schedule and to really have extra time to spend with them, and that's been made just a huge difference. I speak to a lot of clients now, like if there's a teeter-totter where you have time on one side and wealth on the other, and people will give up time to create more wealth, right? And all you're trying to do is buy back time. You save up enough money so you can have the vacation where all you do is do nothing for 2 weeks somewhere on a beach.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for me, right? Like I'd rather make less money and have more time, because you don't get that time back. I'm not going to have that time back with my kids. I want to make sure that I have as much time as humanly possible with them, not just from an imprint standpoint, especially in today's world, but also because that's my joy in life, and that fills my cup each day to be able to wrestle and tickle and dance party and fucking paint and do all the things. Like I want to be able to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really interesting. So like you on a lot of different levels. Well, especially this kind of connection that when you said this with your dad, right? Like with this observation you had with your dad. So like your dad was really there for you in a big way, right? Like, and then he took a job, right? And he started to make a lot more money. I would imagine like on some level from his perspective, like a lot of his ailments and places he struggled was because he didn't have enough money. So he finally was going to bring more money, and then that would make things a lot better. However, his life kind of got worse from other dimensions, like once he did that. So you saw that firsthand, right? And so I'm just kind of getting the sense of like all these different angles in which you got this sense about like life, this like life balance, this health balance perspective, right? And and then also when you talked about, you got offered this opportunity to go work, right, with health benefits and all that stuff after basically like having no benefits and being poor and working, like living in the garage and all that kind of stuff, right? You turned down this opportunity for all that security, right? Because you were like for something like different, and it was a leap of faith. So it's interesting because there's always this interesting thing that comes up for me when we think about faith is, and I don't know if I have the answer to it. If I did have the answer, I don't know if it would be faith, right? But like what makes a difference between a leap of stupidity, right, and a leap of faith, right? What are the differences that go in there, right? And I think I'm getting a sense like from what you're saying is there's a telos towards something that like ultimately speaks to the good. It like speaks to your like what is really worth valuing. You don't know whether or not it's going to work out. You don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know the way it's going to work out, right? But that something like the good is speaking to you, right? And then you leap towards it, right? That's gonna like, and in your case, it sounds like literally like you leap towards it. And just, I hope you're enjoying this video so far. Just wanted to remind you, if you are interested in diving deeper in what we talk about here on the channel, in fellowship and in a more embodied way, there are a number of relevant links in the show notes, including working with me one-on-one as a client. All the information is below, including my email address. Okay, sorry about the technical difficulty there. My power cord disconnected. I didn't see it. But I mean, I think I'm appreciating as I'm hearing kind of the way that your life has worked and what you're up to and what you're facing towards. Really it does have a lot of moments in this element of faith and leaning into something without knowing exactly where it's going, but knowing that there's something on the horizon that ultimately is good. And I don't know what it is. I don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but that light that I see and it's touched me before, I know that like that is good. And if I head in that direction, I can have something like faith that something will work out. And in a couple of incidences, what I heard you say is that you had these opportunities, right, to go for things that were more immediately secure. That you, I would imagine, at times with much turmoil, turned down, right, and turned towards this other thing in the face of that, and that your life has really kind of worked out, right, to where, like, what you're up to are. It sounds to me like, I mean, would you say this, right? This is what I'm getting about you, is that the life that you're living now is really, really embodying that light that you've learned throughout your life on the horizon that spoke to the good, the true, the beautiful, right? Like that your life is really about facing that horizon, articulating that horizon, living that horizon.
Yeah, brother. Absolutely. I hadn't read the book The Alchemist until like 2018, I want to say. So it wasn't a lot of people like, oh, I remember reading that in high school. So
Yeah.
like, I wasn't reading books in high school.
I haven't read it. I haven't read it yet.
It's it's fantastic. Your son, I think, would like it. I played it for Bear on a road trip, and it's really the tale of this life, the life that we're describing, and where there are challenges and ups and downs, but if there's a level of trust that can happen and then saying yes to doing the things necessary to see where it goes, it does pan out, and if I look in hindsight as 2020, every single thing that's happened has had some designed element of it where, I had a download here in this ceremony, or some of life circumstances gave me, a little push in the right direction. I didn't mention it, but when I went to interview for Aubrey, I had this podcast. I had one sponsor that paid me $90,000 a year, which, as you know, as a podcaster, that's a fucking good amount of money.
Yeah.
90 grand a year from one sponsor. And we were living in Vegas at the time. And I had a $30,000 severance from them if shit wasn't going to work out. And so I get a call on my flight to Austin from Vegas for the interview with Aubrey and on it. And I get a call from the CEO and he says, hey, really sorry, we're having financial troubles. We got to fire you and we can't pay you your severance, even though there's a contract for it. So in my mind, I'm like, holy shit. Like I might have to ask my mom for a loan for a U-Haul to move back into the garage with my wife and kid and totally go back in the opposite direction of where I want to go. But one door shut and the next one opened, almost in tandem. It's the very same weekend, right? I get the job offer at the end of the weekend. And I knew too, if I showed up in this panicked, holy shit moment, this just happened. That's not the same guy that Aubrey had met. It's not the same guy he shared the flight with, and it's not the same guy he wanted to hire. Mm-hmm. So really it was about, how do I meditate? How do I clear this? How do I come back from my center on that flight? And what was cool is, this happened right before I got on the flight, this call. Mm-hmm. And considering all things, the worst phone call I've ever had at that point in time, probably, like the most devastating financially. We were living check to check at that point. Yeah. Even at 90 a year, and really spending for the future, shit like that, getting podcast equipment, doing different things. Yeah. And so there wasn't anything in the bank to get us back. And I meditated the whole flight. When that flight ended, I was higher than I was higher than pre-flight. Like I felt like I was fucking levitating coming off that plane. And that's the energy I brought when I met Aubrey, and we had a great weekend. He had a series of events as a part of the interview. And at the end, he was like, when can you start? And I just started laughing. I go, well, I got this phone call on the flight here. And he's like, no shit. He's like, wow. So, that started everything kind of just like I said, this little hand gesture I'm making are like gears flowing together in a watch. Yeah. That's what it doesn't feel like that in the thickness of it. But certainly when I look back, that's what it looks like. And that's been pretty cool because there's, it's not without the challenge or without, a serious leap of faith where it's like, I'm going to turn down this fucking guaranteed thing that would completely satisfy most people. That would come. I mean, it's not like if I started me at 100 grand, that'd have been good news. But starting at 250, with the opportunity to go up, like that's a whole different element to turn down. It's a whole different animal to say no to. Yeah. But I've done that enough to where my trust meter's expanded. You know, when I get an inkling of what I should do, my intuition, you call that intuition, call it communication with the high self, you know, your soul, whatever you want to look at that. I've strengthened that line of communication and that cord so much that when it speaks to me, I know it just, there's no thought necessary. I might poke around and say, oh, why is that? That's interesting. But the answer is yes. When I'm told what to do from within, there's no, squabbling over it or fighting it or going back and forth like I did originally, you know, in the Aya ceremony about paleo effects. Like I've had enough of these things where it's just like, cool, we'll see what happens. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I know it will.
Right. Now this is, so it sounds like, I think what I heard you say is like that thing that like lets you know something's good, right? And lets you know this I can trust, And it sounds like through a series of leaps of faith and trusting it, right? Your ability to trust it is so much more. Like it's not like a blind faith. It's something that's both, it sounds like it's both been through grace and sacrifice and disclosure and making choices and leaps of faith on your end. It's like, it's been both. I mean, I'm hearing in your story like a both of like lots of sweat and lots of grace coming together. And would you say would you say that this thing that you can trust so much more, right? I would imagine in many cases it's like second nature, right? The thing that you can trust, like you can trust so much more. Would you say that your ability to perceive, I don't want to put this, the ability to perceive where you want to go and when it's good, has that increased as well? Your ability to perceive?
I think so. I can get there through various routes. One of the things that I've said, you know, we have a 118 acre regenerative farm that we started with Aubrey in 2021. And 2020 was a big real reason for that, right? You know, the world shutting down, our events being face-to-face, Fit for Service. We do events with 150 to 200 people. We're all in close proximity. There's online education and shit like that, but that's not the bread and butter. That's not the piece of it that people take home where their lives are changed. And you've been at 2 or 3 of these events, I think. And so you've experienced it firsthand. And so you also know from doing events like this yourself, where there is something more to the shared collective energy of a festival and a shared collective energy of going through something challenging with one another. Yeah. And so when 2020 happened, we were like, our business is fucking gone if we have to do this online. Like there's no one sticking around. Mm-hmm. There's no one that's going to stick around for this online. Like we have to be able to meet face to face. And you know, Aubrey already had some land in Sedona, which you've been to, and we kind of retrofitted that 46 acres so that we could hold 150 people on site there when they were only allowing 20 people at a time to be together. And you know, we see now, you know, the potential for this to come back around. But the reason I bring this up is because fear was a driver for that as well. And it's funny to look in hindsight and say, like, fear has been an interesting thing where for a long time, due to what I've read about, you know, different spiritual traditions and things like that, I should be exercising that out. I should come to a state of no fear and just be completely centered. Yeah. And the truth is, fear lit a fire under my ass that I wouldn't have necessarily had to grow our own food, to make sure we had a second place where we could host people and a place to help develop consciousness, you know, and by all legal means necessary, right? We're not running ceremonies at the farm, but we've got breath work, shamanic breath work. We've got ecstatic dance. We've got the sweat lodge. You know, we just had an amazing medicine woman from Ecuador come and pour sweat. Those are transformative experiences where you can't help but move into an altered state of consciousness. And if I track, you know, my pivotal moments, they've come from these altered states, either induced pharmaceutically or induced from the plants. Yeah, they've come in a state of being that's outside of my normal shell, you know, and I think if we can offer that together and go through these things for those that are willing and ready with the right container, that can be the biggest and most profound shift in people's lives. So, you know, I have to credit fear a little bit as well, because intuition is one way in which I listen, and then fear is another. But fear, I have to be careful that I'm not just acting, right? Like
Yeah.
how much food do I need? Do I need a 3-year supply? Do I need a 5-year supply? It's probably don't need any of that. We gave away a bunch of stuff in our pantry, before it expired. And it was like, yeah, we didn't end up needing that. I don't think it's going to be Mad Max at Thunderdome. At the same time, I do feel like it's a good idea to have some extra food. So it's really this balance point of being clear and listening to that intuition, and then also balancing that with the external, right? Because there's a lot that's happened in the external. And I know a lot of people that just put their head in the sand like ostriches and said, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's going to be fine. So, but my intuition wouldn't let me do that. It wouldn't allow me to just bury my head in the sand. It said, no, you got to take this in. It's going to be hard to look at. You got to look at it.
Yeah.
And so I think some amalgamation of external pressures with also, the internal knowing that I can tap into and that we all can tap into. It's been a combination of that in the last few years that has really been a driving force into where we are now. And I credit all of it. I have love and respect and credit for all of it because they're beautiful teachers,
I've heard somebody once say that wisdom is knowing the right thing to be terrified about. Being terrified of the right thing.
I like that.
And what I think I heard you say is like you look on the horizon, you realize like, oh, this thing, these places that we do all of our work that's so important could go away unexpectedly. Let's shore this up. Let's get some property. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's, I'm curious for you, when you first took the job at Onnit and you went out there, right? So from kind of what I'm gathering from your story is you pretty much, you've been up until that point, you had been fighting and probably training and kind of basically making your living mostly from your own generation, right? Generating like things yourself as a fighter and probably as a trainer and all those different kinds of things. Was Aubrey the first time where you actually like jumped into a company?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to the fighting thing too. I probably had 3 jobs fighting outside of fighting, right? I had my pro fight career. I was a trainer. I was a bouncer, bartender, and manager at a local gentleman's club, a bikini bar in Sunnyvale, Sporty's Bikini Bar. If you ever make your way out there, you'll see how tiny it is. It's a little hole in the wall spot.
Yeah.
So yeah, the odds and end jobs were consistent. I mean, I worked two nights a week at Sporty's for 7 years. Through my fight career. It wasn't like a part-time thing. It was like, that was my anchor where I could count on that income to put food on the table. When I talked about having my eye fractured, I fought once that whole year. And even though it was a fight of the night, $40,000 bonus, 10 grand to show up, 10 grand to win. You're looking at 60 grand. I'm paying 10% to coaches, 10% to management, 13.3% to California. The Fed wants half. I'm making less than a teacher's salary. And that's tough as a pro athlete. So, I mean, I really counted on that money from the strip club to support me. And it's an odd place too, to go through these plant medicine journeys and then come back and immerse yourself in that environment. But I kind of started to see it from all angles. I had a lot of gratitude.
I was a stripper in my early 20s for a couple of years.
I heard about that from Aubrey. That's why I wanted to throw that out. That's badass.
Yeah.
I got on the stage myself for the ladies at the end of the night after closing a few times to make a little extra coin.
Yeah.
But I appreciated that. I didn't appreciate the fact that as a professional athlete, I needed fucking 3 other jobs. That's ridiculous. But I did appreciate the fact that I had that. I had something I could count on.
Yeah.
And with that, there was no huge push. Like living in my mom's garage, it's a fucking garage. It's not, it's not, we don't own a home. There's nothing there. It's not ours. It's rent. But it was $500 a month to be in the Bay Area where we had access to the beach and the Tahoe and the mountains and all the things and the people I grew up with. There's an energy there that I grew up and was accustomed to. Also with very little overhead, I didn't have a ton of financial stress. Renting a house in Vegas was the first tidbit of holy shit. Like I got to make all these things spin and work. And, but yeah, to answer your point, with the low overhead, I could just continue to learn. I could be, just reading books and soaking that in and trusting that that's going to pan out for me, which it has via podcasting. And which it had in my qualifications to be director of human optimization at Onnit. When I got to Onnit, that was the first time I'd ever been in a cubicle. And I fought tooth and nail. I told Aubrey, I said, man, I'd rather get punched in the face than have a fucking cubicle job. Do I have to be at my desk? He's like, no. I was like, I meant that when I said it originally. I'd rather be punched in the face than have a cubicle. And so I didn't have to be at my desk. And I could walk 20 yards to jiu-jitsu mats and roll with the 10th Planet guys. I could go 100 yards and I'd be in a sauna and ice bath. We had all the best equipment in the Onnit gym, which was, pancaked next to Onnit Labs, which is where, most of the employees developing supplements and things like that were going. So the access of that made it really like a one-of-a-kind scenario from that. But, when I first started there, because I was coming off of being fired so abruptly with no money in the bank, there was a lot of fear there. And I started, that was that first, as I talk about this teeter-totter, I did sacrifice quite a bit of time being at work. And anything that was going on, if I needed to do something, and Aubrey was like, hey, I got this going on. Can you come? Yes was my answer, at the cost of my son and my wife, right? So I had to learn the hard way firsthand for the first couple of years I was there until I think Paul Chek recommended the book Essentialism by Patrick McKeown. Yeah. And that ability to hone into, these are the things that I've set out to do, really clarifying my mission and understanding the power of no as redirected back to that mission became super important. But right then, having fucked up my timing and spent time away, re-engineered me coming back to that right relation with time. When my son was born, I'd work twice a week. It was post-fighting. I only had those 2 shifts at the strip club. Yeah. So 5 days a week, I could take him to the ocean. I could do whatever. I could play with him 5 days a week. Then I'd go work for 12 hours a day for back-to-back days, and that was it. It's kind of like Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week. People would go to work for 5 days and have 2 days off, and I had the inverse of that. So coming from that, where that was his only experience of me for 2 years, it was very hard for him to have me go to a 40-hour work week job. Yeah. And it was very hard on me. It was very hard on our whole family. But, you put yourself in a position where I put myself in a position where, without Aubrey, there was a lot of people there that said you should be at your desk, and so it made it ultra clear when he left to step down as CEO that was not the position for me. At the same time, the one door shuts, the other one opens. He had already started Fit for Service. He had a vision at Don Howard's and Spirit Quest about starting a year-long mastermind where we could teach everything that we've done to ourselves. What are all the things legally that we can give to people that will shift them, and how do we build tribe, how do we build community in a way where people can have lifelong relationships, lifelong friendships, and that's been awesome. We're in year 5. You've been a part of it as well. We get to, some of my favorite things about that is that anything we're not an expert in, we bring in other experts and we become homies, and that's how I get to be friends with a guy like you or a guy like Vervaeke or Mark Gaffney, another great guy, right? So there's so many great people that we get to meet through that's become something that seemed far more important to me in the bang for my buck on a time as far as my time is concerned. How do I want to spend my time helping people or creating supplements that might help somebody depending on how they use it? And it's like, it was a no-brainer, right? Yeah. So I think the transition away from the corporate life was a hell of a lot easier for me as well, because we had this other door open, and I had really spent quite a bit of time away from the family that I didn't want to. If I was going to make my own schedule, I wouldn't have been there that often.
Yeah, totally. So really, I'm also getting like kids. I mean, what was it like having your first kid? How did being a parent, how did that affect you? Like, I mean, I think Reiki talks about this, like, as a scientist, he's like, if you want to know about transformation, have kids.
Yeah, right? It's kind of, it's a mind fuck in the best possible way, like most medicine journeys are. It's a mind fuck because I had Bear at 33. My wife was 30, and I realized very quickly I'm a kid who has a kid. And I thought about my parents. My dad, I think, was 31. He was a kid when he had me. My mom was 21. She was a kid when she had me, a fucking young kid when she had me. I could never have been a parent in my early 20s. Yeah. And so there was a lot of compassion for them, like in an odd way, like, holy shit. I think that does happen for most of us. The goal of any parents to do better than your parents did. And most of us are successful at that. And oddly enough, the full circle of that is to come back and say, you guys did great too. right? Like I could see that. I could see how hard it is being a dad, and the pressures of money, the pressures of all these things, the pressures of relationship. You got to juggle so many things while it's going. And my wife and I have been through a lot, but we've never cursed at each other. We've never done any of the same mistakes that my parents did, and I can thank them for that. You know, I can thank them because the knowing was so strong. Even if I'm super angry or super triggered or super anything, there's never a finger pointing, you know, you're an X, Y, and Z. Like none of that exists in the vocabulary because of those experiences. So, but it's a mind fuck. And then I did realize I was a kid, you know, like I didn't think of myself as an adult in the sense like, yeah, I'm 30, I'm an adult now, that kind of shit. But like, I very much was still a kid when we had Bear, and there's a graduation process.
Was Bear intentional, or was it a surprise? Or
oh, Bear absolutely was intentional. I mean, it happened quickly. Like I said, we had this vision on ayahuasca. We shared a vision where she was holding a baby, I was holding a baby, and she was holding the two of us.
Yeah.
And she says this in closing circle, and I'm like, hold on, I got to stop you. I don't mean to interrupt, but I had the exact same vision, and I had only read about that in books on ayahuasca that you could have shared visions. So it was a big deal. And that got us talking about it. The next journey we went into a month later, same exact vision, but I could see it was a boy. And so all of my fear of being a father came up. I had to work on a ton of shit with my dad. And once I had moved through all that, especially the fallacy of what was needed, right? I'm in a garage. I have no medical and dental. I have no savings. I have no 401k. I have none of the things I'm supposed to have. And none of that matters. That's everyone else's fear. That's everyone else's guideline. I don't need any of that shit to have a kid.
Yeah.
And so with that agreement, a month later, we were pregnant with Bear. And I knew it was a boy, and I knew who he was because I'd already spoken to him. I got a chance to speak to him on the medicine and hear what's your name? What do you want to be? What's the body you're going to have? All these things. And I've been able to do that with both of our kids. Bear happened very quickly, right? Right after the ceremony, a month later, we're pregnant with him. Wolf, I got to make contact with in 2016, and we didn't have her until 4th of July, 2020. So four fucking years later, smack dab in the center of one of the most crazy times ever in my life, for sure, the most crazy time, and on purpose, right? By design. That's another thing that I don't fully understand it, but I do understand that, you know, where the stars are, where the planets are, that all actually matters in the imprint of when a soul jumps into its body. And that's probably the best shitty explanation I can give it, but that's why we had to wait. And she too is just an amazing person that's continued the evolution, right? Bear was 5 years old when we had her. We wanted to space our kids, but not that far. And in a certain, you know, then a certain aspect, it's not up to us, right? It's totally up to them when they come, how they come. And, you know, that's been a lot more medicine for me as well, is having that little girl. But the two of them are just amazing, and they share so much, and they're also each their own individual being. And in many ways, I've become a father after becoming a father. You know, I've worked to become a father and to wear that hat and to have the archetype of that fully imprinted through my body. But it's taken, you know, it's taken 8 years. Bear's 8 now, and Wolf is 3. You know, I think it's right now I feel comfortable enough in saying I know how to dad. You know, and there'll be stages where that changes. You know, we'll have a little girl who turns 13 at some point, and that's going to be a whole new bag to work with, right? So you can have mastery at one level of the game, and then the Rubik's Cube fucking moves on you, and all of a sudden you're like, no, it was all red yesterday. I'd almost finished it. Now it's all messed up again. So I think
you made a really interesting distinction right there. I want to pick up on, like you said, and being a father, I've actually could say I've become a father. Like, a couple of things I think implied in that is, like, one, is it possible to be a father without becoming a father, right? And there's this process of becoming a father that you can now say that you, in fact, know something about what it's like to be a father. Curious, that becoming a father, what are some of the things that you found that entails? Like I would imagine it's probably some version of like letting go of things, some things, acquiring some things, like a process of letting go and adding on. And what are some of the things that you've had to let go of in becoming a father?
That's a great one. I'll say that there's a couple things. One, when we had Bear, it brought up a lot of dad shit for me, stuff that I had already worked on in ayahuasca plenty of times, and I was just like, why more dad shit?
Yeah.
And I realized it was because we had a boy, and more came up too when we entered into the age like 3 years old plus, where discipline, some form of discipline was required.
Yeah.
And how do I go about that? And that was probably one of the biggest mind fucks, because my knee-jerk reaction was I wanted to spank him. And it's something I said I'd never do. And yet it was ingrained to want to do that. And it took everything and rewriting that inside me. It was like one of the hardest challenges that I've ever had, was saying like, that doesn't help. And even if I had done it, it didn't improve. It didn't reach the outcome we were looking for. We've read, I'll deep dive any topic that I can get my hands on if it actually matters, and so nothing matters more than being a dad in my life. So we've deep dived a lot of books on kids and things like that. And there's a great book called The Soul of Discipline by Kim Jong Pain. And one of the things he says is we go through this series where we spank or we do something physical and we say that doesn't work. Then we drop down to yelling and we say, well, yelling doesn't work. Then we drop down to over explaining shit until our kid checks out and that doesn't work. And I remember reading that and I was laughing so hard. I think my wife was reading it too at the same time as she sent it to me. And I was like, oh God, just like white ghost face looking at that. I was like, we're at level 3 right now. Fucking just over explaining shit till we've got a ghost staring in front of us.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, he's so spot on. But it's like there's a point. He talks a lot about being the governor, and it's not a my way or the highway thing. It's just like this is what's right and this is what's wrong.
Right.
And these are how we do things in our family. And it's very matter of fact. And there's no explanation needed. Yeah. Because you're the parent. It doesn't mean do because I say so or do it because I said so. That's not it at all. But it's just explaining things as the way that they are. And I think that's been a lot easier because it can be to the point, right? Kids don't need a long ass drawn out answer on something. They need to know the meat and potatoes of it. And if you give them that enough times and allow them the space to work with it, they'll come to see it for themselves. Yeah. And the Becoming a Father has been part of that. There's another great book called Becoming Nobody by Ram Dass, and it's on Audible. It's a collection of his lectures. And one of the things he says about anger is that anytime you're angry, and I'm going to butcher this, paraphrasing it, but anytime it's worth a list. It's one of my favorite books. Anytime you're angry, you feel transgressed on. Mm-hmm. Right? In order for anger to come up, it's like, you fucking, how dare you? Right? There's an element of how dare you.
Violation, yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So if I'm angry with my kids, and that means that I have the how dare you attitude, right? Yeah, that means that there's you transgressed on me. How could you, right?
Yeah.
You respect me more. That's comical. When I heard that, I was like, oh God, what a mirror. Yeah. And now I can laugh at that. And it doesn't mean there are times where I'm like, find myself getting pissed. My wife and I are great at recognizing that in one another and just very gently saying, hey, center. And as we do that, there's like it's like a whisper from down the hallway coming in. Yeah. It just comes from the side. And it's like, oh, I'm not centered. Okay. Let me center myself. Oh, I'm angry right now. Oh, okay. Yeah. And why am I? Oh, okay. Well, I don't need to be angry. Right. My kid is being a kid. And they're doing exactly what they're fucking supposed to be doing at this age. And they're doing exactly what I did at that age and exactly what my dad did at that age and exactly what granddad did at that age, all the way back. And so if I can acknowledge that and not take it personally, now I actually can govern the situation, right? I actually don't need to yell. I actually can, whatever's necessary. My intuition will tell me if I'm angry, there's no fucking intuition. If I've got tunnel vision, I'm not going to see things clearly. Right. So coming from the center allows me to see things clearly, and then I can see what the situation actually needs. Does it need my presence? Sometimes it just needs me to say, hey, buddy, what's going on? And put a hand on his shoulder. Mm-hmm. And if I can listen, then I might find he wants more attention, isn't getting it. Right. So that's why he's picking on his sister right now. Yeah. Or whatever the thing is, right? You can fill in the blank with 100 different things, but it's coming from almost a zero state, which allows me to perceive what actually needs to happen for them to be happy. And then from there, there's no yelling, there's no hitting, there's no anything that's necessary. None of that shit works anyways. So I might as well come back to zero and figure out what's going to work in each situation.
Yeah, totally. Well, you got this sense of, as it sounds like basically what I heard you say is like, rather than reacting, in your first instinct, right, to your kids, which kids will bring up every situation in the world to react to, right? But like not reacting and kind of stepping back and kind of going meta, and then like looking at what is the optimal thing. You know, I got on one level, like you do the optimal thing, but you're also this governor that you're being on some level. Like that seems like a really good person to, you as governor seems like a really good person to model.
Yeah, I think there's we all have the best version of ourselves, and sometimes when we're there or immediately after being there, you're like, oh shit, I was there. It's kind of like flow state. You know, if you're in flow, you're in it. The second you label, wow, I'm in flow state, you're no longer there. If you're meditating and you're like, I reached the 0 point, and the second your mind thinks that, you're no longer there. Yeah. But there is a way where we can almost like, you know, setting up for Dialogos, right? You set this container and potentially without your starting it, the thing lights on fire. And I think with that, there are certain ways where I can optimize my behavior and my sense of being that will give the best possible outcome for how I respond to today's challenges.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It's so interesting. Just having kids has been, I know, I mean, I had one child when I was in my late 20s, I think. And then now I'm having a second child. And so I'm kind of getting two doses of that, right? At very different times of my life. And it's so interesting, like feeling how much they, on one level, there's this kind of like, if you look at it just from a personal transformational perspective, right? Having a young child and an infant and like watching this being come into the world, right? And watching him develop language and being a part of all of that and everything that takes. And now I'm like having that at the same time that I'm having, and it's funny because I don't hear people talk about this, but a lot about this, about how to parent adults that were your children. Like, and I feel like I'm learning how to do that. Like, and it's interesting because I had my 20-year-old. I'm out visiting my mom, and she's been having some health things, and it brought me out, and I flew my 20-year-old son out here, and like we ended up just him sitting and talking, and we just ended up having about, I don't know, a 10-hour spontaneous circling experience, right? Where he told me all of these things, right? He's crying and like revealing all of these like pivotal moments for him that I wasn't aware of, and how they affected him, right, in our relationship. And like we got to kind of like just see it, right, and acknowledge it and complete it, right, in some respects, and know about it. And like this really, really, really amazing conversation that like just left me feeling like he's just the best creature in the known universe, right, in some sense. So I think I'm just appreciative of the transforming element that being a parent is, right, on so many different levels. And I think I've heard you just a number of times in some of the, well, hearing about the choices that you made in your life, but talk about like it seems like, and I think you used the word homesteading. This way of being home, right? A lot of the time, and I think that means growing your own food, like, right, spending time with your kids, being home with your kids more, all of that. Like, could you say a little bit more about that? Like, what does homesteading mean?
I'm sure there's probably a ton of great definitions that are better than mine, but you could homestead a half an acre, right? You could go up to 10 acres. You could do, I don't know, you'd probably be a pretty full blown ranch at 1,500 acres. Like my buddies at Rome Ranch who do Force of Nature bison, regenerative bison out in Fredericksburg. We've got 118 acres, and it's what you choose to do with that is really a factor of your own desire. If you like cows and you want to regenerate the land, there's a lot of people you can learn from, guys like Alan Savory and different folks that can help you do that, and then you have a better understanding of how nature works, how ecosystems work, how to regenerate, and you're getting healthier soil and you're getting healthier plants and you're getting healthier animals. And depending on what you eat, that's all going to cycle everything up. Right. One of the factors I think in regenerative agriculture is that it does leave everything more whole than when it started. So kind of like the good drug, bad drug thing, right? It's going to benefit all things.
Yeah.
Homesteading is different for every person. We choose to homeschool our kids right now, especially, in the last 3 years, seeing kind of how everything's gone. My wife was homeschooled up until high school. I've met quite a few people through this podcast that were homeschooled K through 12, guys like the Schmachtenberger brothers, Daniel and James Schmachtenberger, brilliant guys. Ben Greenfield, so I keep name dropping. The point is that there's plenty of people that make an education for themselves in that way, and they're not lacking in social skills. They're not lacking in all the things that you'd be your textbook nature. Why'd you do that? Why should you do that? And isn't it hard? Well, yeah, it's hard, but it's also hard to uneducate. You see me wearing my buddy's shirt, unlearn. I don't want to have to spend 15 fucking years teaching them the shit that they were taught that was incorrect, like unprogramming the indoctrination that happens in school. I'd rather not waste time with that, and understanding Rudolf Steiner, who understood a ton of shit. I'm just diving into his work, but he was the founder of biodynamic farming, or really at least the understanding of biodynamic farming, and spoke to this 100 years ago. Really our role in nature and what that means. But he also was the founder of Waldorf education and really understood the stages at which children learn. Every 7 years there's a cycle. And we had Barrett Waldorf in Austin before lockdowns, and they decided to move to they wanted to follow CDC guidelines and move to online education, which was everything that Steiner said not to do, medically as well as technologically. He was around before computers, but you had to sign a waiver that said minimal screen time. Like you don't have a movie night once per week. You could watch a movie like twice a year, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then they expect, to have these guys, they're doing that every day. It just didn't make sense. But one thing they do good in Waldorf is you have 3 years of kindergarten, 4, 5, and 6. So the kids two grades above you and 2 grades below you. You have a chance of being the rookie, the middleman, and then the older kid. And it was going to be Bear's 3rd year in kindergarten when we decided to roll the dice on homeschooling, and it just made sense. And it has been hard at times, but we can spend. You talk to a lot of homeschoolers; they'll spend fucking 90 minutes to maximum 3 hours a day on education, and the whole rest of the day they have to do everything else. And these kids are testing just as high, if not higher, than their peers. Yeah, that really jogs the wheels on what's happening in school, right? Like, how is that time wasted? Where is this not happening? And I think it has to do with the direct education aspect of a parent loves their kid more than anybody and will make sure their kid gets it. Yeah. They're also going to be working with them and maybe a couple other siblings, right? Like my wife was one of 5 kids. So like her mom really knew what she was doing, but it's not a classroom full of kids. It's not 30 kids to teach, right? So you can get a much more individualized experience in education. And I've seen that with Bear. I mean, guys like Rob Wolf are doing the same thing. He taught us about the Life of Fred books, which is all math through word problems. And so they're reading these things and they're coming to understand mathematics. And these go all the way up to college level, right? They have college level textbooks that are Life of Fred. And he loves them. He's asking me to do that. We did one of them this morning. He's like, can I do Life of Fred before you go to work? And I'm like, yeah, man, let's do a chapter. And so we'll sit down, and I always smile and I get kind of giddy because I never gave a shit about math. Like I did it because I had to do it. Right. I had no intention of wanting to learn that thing. I just had to learn it for basic skills in the world. And he enjoys it. He can read music fluently. He loves violin. We have a tutor come out once a week and he practices, another 4 or 5 days a week. He's in jiu-jitsu at night and loves jiu-jitsu. So, I mean, and in jiu-jitsu, he's got plenty of kids to play with and things like that. We've got another group of friends around the same age that are all homeschooled as well, and they come out to the farm. So, homesteading is a lot of things. I think really, there's an educational aspect where we want our kids not just to learn what's required of them in school, but also real world shit. How do I plant a garden? How do I tend that garden? What does permaculture design actually look like? So diving into Sepp Holzer's work, and we have 400 fruit and nut trees, 1,000 plus plants in the ground. And that's in one little section, with 130 chickens, 20 ducks, 4 geese, 2 emus, 2 donkeys. That's just in a tight little container there. Outside of that, we do regenerative agriculture with 24 cows and 70 sheep.
Yeah.
And so they get to learn all these things that we get to watch. Like, this is one of the beautiful things. When you put something in the ground, you watch it grow. It's a living thing. And it needs your care, just like a kid does. Not as much care as a kid, but it absolutely needs care in the first 7 years. After that, it's pretty self-automated. It can kind of figure shit out for itself. And if you give it enough of the things that it needs, light and water and nutrients, it's going to be just fine on its own. But really, in this infancy now, where we're 2 years into it, the kids love it. They love seeing stuff grow. They love grabbing fruit and having, the fruit of their work. They get to have that fruit ripen right on the tree. And I think that's an experience too. When you think of like what's wrong in the world, what are the disconnects? You can point to a lot of things. A disconnect from a health and wellness standpoint, a disconnect from our food has got to be front line and center. It's one of the biggest factors on what we're conditioned to put in our body based on palatability and food science versus what is actually healthy for us. It really has to do with the disconnect from nature. And I think if we can lean into that, and what does that look like? How do I re-engineer that? Giving kids the opportunity to be on the land, to plant trees for themselves, to know like, this is our harvest time. This is how we're going to clean the chicken stall out, and that's going to go into our giant compost pile. And in 6 months, that's going to go back onto the trees. And we're starting to talk about this evolution, where we have these cycles of death and decay and regeneration and rebirth. And that also tunes us into the annual cycle. We have a lunar cycle, we have an annual cycle, the seasons. And I think it's important that we understand the cyclical nature of time. And there's no better way to teach that than to actually tune in, to actually go outside when there's a full moon, to go outside when there's a new moon, to spend time in nature. Camping is one thing, but actually to have a space that you can cultivate, like a 118-acre canvas. That's been one of the greatest gifts that we've ever had. So we're building our house out there right now. We have a full team because it's a full-time deal.
Is that where is that around Austin, or where are you living?
It's 30 minutes south of Austin, out in Lockhart. And what's great is, farms aren't terribly equitable, in terms of like return on investment strictly from farming. But we don't need it to be that, because we use it as a center for healing and education, and we do that with Fit for Service. We do that with education on permaculture design, regenerative agriculture. Anybody that I learn from, these experts we bring in, and they run courses there as well. So we've been able to learn firsthand from people. And then thanks to our community, we share that with people firsthand. People can figure out who to go to, who have we learned from that's helped us, who did they study from, that kind of lineage. If you look at jiu-jitsu, it's like, who'd your coach get his black belt from? Oh, he got his black belt from this guy, which is Royler Gracie's son. And you just go down the ladder until you get back to the origins of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You can do that in many ways with biodynamics, with regenerative agriculture, and with permaculture design. And I think, all of these, we get to play on the land with all of these different components, right? Permaculture is not the same thing as regenerative agriculture. They can work together for sure, but they're not the same thing. And I think, with my background in health and wellness from a performance standpoint, this is the stuff that I was putting my money towards anyways. I went out to Rome Ranch and split a bison cow with them when Wolf was in the womb. I wanted that bison to build her body while she was in the womb via mom. I wanted to build Bear's body as a 5-year-old, right? He got to sit on my lap and see that animal get shot. And while it was still warm, we went and put hands on it and prayed and thanked it for its body. That's lost when you go to the supermarket and buy a T-bone, right? You don't have that degree of intimacy. Right. And it's necessary to understand the life, death, degeneration, regeneration cycle. Like, we have to understand that this completes the cycle, is participating in death and decay to get regeneration and rebirth. And so I think the more we connect kids to that too, the greater their understanding of the circle of life. And there's cute exposés on that in The Lion King and things like that, where you really get a kind of an understanding, but it becomes visceral when you participate with it.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much medicine in that. and like I said, fear was the driver too. We may see, you need a special pass to get in the grocery store at some point. Medically, you may not have grocery stores at some point. I don't think that we're going to run into issues like that, but 120 plus food processing centers have gone up in flames in the last 2 years in North America. No one's talking about that. That is trackable and 100% legit. And I want to know where my food comes from. Even if I am shopping at a grocery store, I certainly want to know where my food's coming from if there's a lack of, or it's hard to attain that stuff. And as a father, I think that's been a huge driving force. But, it speaks to need, it speaks to survivability, but it also speaks beyond that. It speaks to my spiritual connection with nature and theirs as well. And I think that on so many levels, it tackles the needs and also the wants spiritually to expand and to be connected to nature. And it does so in a way that you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. So how long have you been living on that land? Like, because before then, were you living in Austin, more in the city, or how long have you been?
I'm here right now in Austin in the suburbs, and we're building our house right now on the land. And we're out there 2 to 5 days a week. I mean, I'm there every Tuesday, Wednesday, but we go out with the kids a lot. If we don't, the less we have going on, birthday parties and shit and obligations, the more we're there. Yeah. And I mean, even on our 1/10 of an acre here, like this little 1/10 of an acre is a garden. We've got bunch bamboo, we've got fruit trees. We've eaten 7 figs off his fig tree this year. So like there's little things like that. Our flower garden, and we had we've got 8-foot wildflowers, and every bee and hummingbird and butterfly will come out there. So like there's ways that you can do with very little, you can do a lot that will start to bring it in. It'll start to bring in, lizards and frogs and all sorts of stuff. We on 1/10 of an acre in the suburbs, we have all that here. So it's something that I've known for a while, since really starting, the medicine journey path with ayahuasca. There was a draw for that. When I was in my mom's garage, I started putting fruit trees in there and started working with plants there. And we didn't have, livestock there, but now that we do, it's like, what a cool thing. We got to raise chickens at our house in Austin until they were 6 months old. And that's when we brought them out to the farm. So all the chickens we had, they all got names from the kids. They were held daily from the kids. And now we're raising 100 chicks at the farm. We don't have the luxury or the responsibility of doing that at home, but every time we're there, the kids go in there, they pick them up. We talk to the geese, we feed them grass by hand, we feed them bread by hand. And there's a relationship that's being built. And I think that's such a powerful relationship to have for kids too. And also to know, like, we may eat those, those are egg layers, but there is a point where if they're infighting or something like that, or something gets sick, like we're going to eat it. We ate one of our emus. We had and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. I know we're cutting on time, but we had 2 male emus and 1 female. And male emus sit on the eggs. They'll sit on the eggs the entire gestation period. And so one male, Uncle Larry, who we named him, he sat on the eggs, and the other one, Foghorn Leghorn, didn't like it. He wanted those eggs to be his. So he started biting him in the back until he picked off every feather on his back, about mid-back down to his ass. Whoa. And Larry would just stoically sit there like, no, these are my eggs. I'm not fucking moving an inch. And he kept doing that. I realized, like, well, the mean one, we have to figure this out. We can't just let this guy get abused the rest. And I was like, well, let's look up emu. We started looking at emus. First of all, there's emu oil, which is sought after in health and wellness. And emu meat is a red meat. It's a red meat bird like an ostrich. It's very healthy, very lean. So I killed and harvested, and we ate Foghorn Leghorn. And now, the male and the female as a pair are perfectly good. We can come by and pet them and love on them, and there's no infighting. But that emu is something the kids got to eat and be a part of, right? Like, nothing goes to waste. Even the rest of its body feeds back into the land. We have a little spot in the land where we leave out the entrails and things of certain animals for hogs, for coyotes, for vultures, and caracaras, and all of that feeds back into it. You don't have to bear anything to ferment it. You can, but for the most part, things digest very well above ground. And then bones will break down at the rate at which the soil can take in the nutrients from the bones. You start to understand, like, the rhythms of nature are all coordinated. But I think that those are pieces too, where you can have that relationship and love an animal and still eat it. You can still say, like, I'm going to give you your best life possible. And it doesn't have to be, the Disney caricature of, no, these are our animals, we don't touch them. I'm a meat eater, I'm an omnivore. And at the same time, I do want to honor those animals and the lives they had. And I want them to have the best possible fucking life before they go, where they're able to help everything around them. They're regenerating the soil. They're helping the grasslands. They're helping generations that come. And their food is the best possible because they've been given the best nutrients, the best water, the best sunlight. And then we get to take that in. And as we take that in, we become the best versions of ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I think I think I'm appreciating what you're talking about in terms of the picture that you're painting. You said the word participation, right? Like that this deep sense of participating at all the levels of your food, right? At all dimensions of it, and relating to all those levels in with your body, your mind, your action, even knowing the animals that you're eating, that you're going to eat, and everything, and just imagining your kids orienting that way, right? It's so striking because it's like, in some way, modernity and the internet has just made so much of the stuff optional. And I don't think we understood how much that tending to the ground and to the soil, right? The work it takes to kind of raise your own land and your own food, and grow your own food and raise your own food, and all of that stuff, right? Which we are able to replace conveniently. I don't think we understood how much intelligence was in all of that activity, right? And how deeply missing we are of that, where kind of like everything is now essentially reduced to things that you can put into propositions, right? And know about, and then write computer programs about, and all of that kind of stuff. It's just gotten so normal. Life has just gotten so abstract and really kind of meta, and really in a strange way. So this, in some sense, it's strange when you think about it, to say, like, it takes something to really go back to these indigenous kinds of practices that were like regular things, 150 years ago, right? It's so strange that it really takes something to do that consciously, right? And to bring consciousness to it. So I think I'm just appreciating that doing that now on some level, because it's not the norm. I'm imagining in very much the same way with relationship with circling, where with the internet, like relationality, right, has become really, really optional in ways that are just really detrimental for them to be optional, right? And so circling, you just really bring a lot of consciousness to that, and like do it in a concentrated way. And in some senses, like that consciousness that you bring back into it has brought things to relationship that probably weren't present in the norm when people were relating, right? And I'm kind of imagining the same thing here, right? With like kind of coming back into having your own land, and like raising your kids and educating your kids, and like having them involved in the whole process, and all the different things that things that 50 years ago were the norm are now not the norm. But when you take them up and you bring consciousness to that, another alchemy, another level, I would imagine gets realized through that. And I'm kind of sensing that in how you're talking about it. It's really cool.
Yeah, brother, it's been awesome. And it's been something where we had to hit the ground running, like we didn't have a whole lot of experience. My wife was the only single one of us out of the entire team of folks that had any farming experience going into this. But we have been able to lean, and thanks to the internet and thanks to our connection via the podcast, things like that, we've been able to lean on people that have spent the last 30, 40, 50 years doing this. And I think that's been a big help. Most importantly, I think from that though, is the things that move beyond, like it's the experience, the imprint. When you think of initiations and rites of passage and things like that, for Bear to witness, this is how we consume food. He's on my lap and sees that animal go down. We did a 7 directions prayer, and out of the herd of 80 bison, the one we were going to take walked from the herd 100 yards away and walked 20 yards to us and stood broadside. She offered herself to us. There was no chase. There was no singling her out to get her away from the rest of the herd. She did all that on her own. And I think, with that level of intention and communication and permission, we can start to see these things for ourselves, that there is not only a guiding force, but there is a mother tongue that connects us to all things, and if we can start to remember and reintegrate that, it becomes obvious. It doesn't become like, wow, that was a synchronicity. It's like, no. We intended this. We talked to her, we got permission, and she gave herself to us. And now we'll use her body in a right way, and her skull will remain with us in ceremony and in journeys to come. And, her robe will keep us warm in the wintertime. Like, all of these things are factors, nose to tail, everything we can do to really honor the life of that being.
Oh, that's really great. That's really, really, really great. It's really been great talking with you.
Yeah, brother. Absolutely.
Enjoying getting to know you. And I look forward to more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. We'll chat soon, brother.
Bye.